At the age of 96, the Grammy-winning singer Anthony Dominick Benedetto, or professionally known as Tony Bennett, loved by generations, sadly passed away on July 21, 2023 from Alzheimer's disease. In the vast landscape of music, few artists have left as indelible mark as Tony Bennett. With a career spanning over 7 decades, Tony's journey from a young Italian-American crooner to a timeless legend is a testament to his extraordinary talent, dedication, and enduring appeal. From his humble beginnings in Queens, New York, to his iconic performances on the world stage, Tony Bennett's life is a source of inspiration for generations of music enthusiasts. Hi, welcome to YouWannaWatch, and in this video, we're going to commemorate him by presenting the life and legacy of the late Tony Bennett. A Star is Born. Tony was born on August 3, 1926 in Long Island City, Queens in New York. He was the son of grocer John Benedetto, an Italian, and seamstress Anna, an American. He grew up with an older sister, Mary, and an older brother, John Jr. With a father who was ailing and unable to work, Tony and his siblings grew up in poverty. John Sr. instilled in his son a love of art and literature and a compassion for human suffering, but died when Tony was 10 years old. The experience of growing up in the Great Depression and a distaste for the effects of the presidency of Herbert Hoover would make Tony a lifelong Democrat. Tony grew up listening to jazz artists such as Louis Armstrong, Jack Teagarden, and Joe Venuti, as well as Al Jolson, Eddie Cantor, Judy Garland, and Bing Crosby. His uncle Dick was a tap dancer, which provided him with an early introduction to the entertainment industry. By the age of 10, he was already singing, and he performed at the Triborough Bridge opening, standing next to Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia, who patted him on the head. Another early passion of his was drawing, and he became known as the class caricaturist. He began singing for money at the age of 13, working as a singing waiter in many Italian restaurants in his hometown of Queens. Tony studied painting and music at New York School of Industrial Art before dropping out at the age of 16 to support his family and working as a copy boy and runner for the Associated Press in Manhattan, among other low-skilled, low-paying jobs. He mainly focused on a professional singing career, returning to performing as a singing waiter, playing and winning amateur nights all around town, and enjoying a successful engagement at a nightclub in Paramus, New Jersey. World War II. In November 1944, when he was just 18 years old, Tony was drafted into the United States Army during the final stages of World War II. His training was a nightmare from the very beginning, with one of his commanding officers hating him so much, he often picked on the future crooner. Tony did not get off lightly, despite the fact that the war was nearing its end. In reality, he went to the front lines, enduring brutal winters and even liberating a camp near Dachau. Tony would later describe his experiences as a front row seat in hell and a nightmare that's permanent. When he finally escaped this nightmare, he was more certain than ever he wanted to spread joy through music, not pain through violence. Upon his discharge from the Army and return to the States in 1946, Tony studied at the American Theater Wing on the GI Bill. He was taught the bel canto singing discipline, which would serve him well throughout his career. He kept performing anywhere he could, even while waiting tables. Singing career. Tony's skill was spotted by Pearl Bailey, who requested him to open for her in Greenwich Village in 1949. She had invited Bob Hope to the performance. After the show, Bob decided to take him on the road and simplified his name to Tony Bennett. In 1950, Tony cut a demo of Boulevard of Broken Dreams and was signed to the major label Columbia Records by Mitch Miller. Warned by Mitch not to imitate Frank Sinatra, Tony began his career as a crooner of commercial pop tunes. His first big hit was Because of You, a ballad produced by Mitch with a lush orchestral arrangement from Percy Faith. It first gained popularity on jukeboxes before reaching #1 on the pop charts in 1951 and remaining there for 10 weeks, selling over 1 million copies. Later that year, a similarly styled rendition of Hank Williams' Cold Cold Heart reached the top of the charts, helping to bring Williams and country music in general to a wider, more national audience. Mitch and Percy tandem continued to work on all of Tony's early hits. His recording of Blue Velvet was also very popular and attracted screaming teenage fans at concerts at the famed Paramount Theater in New York and elsewhere. His third #1 came in 1953 with Rags to Riches. Unlike Tony's other instrumental break, it topped the charts for 8 weeks. Later that year, the producers of the upcoming Broadway musical Kismet had Tony record Stranger in Paradise as a way of promoting the show during a New York newspaper strike. The song reached the top, the show was a hit, and Tony began a long practice of recording show tunes. Stranger in Paradise was also a #1 hit in the United Kingdom a year and a half later. When the rock and roll era began in 1955, the music industry's dynamic shifted, making it increasingly difficult for established pop performers to succeed commercially. Nonetheless, Tony continued to have success, with 8 singles reaching the Billboard Top 40 in the late 1950s, with In the Middle of an Island peaking at number 9 in 1957. In August to September 1956, Tony hosted The Tony Bennett Show, an NBC Saturday night television variety show, as a summer replacement for The Perry Como Show. Love life. Just as Tony's popularity was taking off, he made a very controversial decision. Well, controversial for his fans at least. At the same time, because of You was climbing the charts, he met the young, pretty Patricia Beach after one of his nightclub shows. The next year, in 1952, he decided to marry her and chaos broke loose. As word of his upcoming wedding spread, his fans' reactions were bizarre. As a kind of protest for the end of his bachelorhood, 2,000 female fans gathered outside the church as he got married, dressed in black to denote their mourning. His marriage to Patricia was happy for a time, but it was not permanent. They had 2 sons, D'Andrea and Deagle, but these joys were insufficient to keep their problems away. The couple announced their divorce in 1965, and the reason was unusual. It was not that Tony and Patricia didn't love each other, rather, he loved his work more. He was used to an up-and-grind mentality and was always on the move. None of his accomplishments were sufficient for him, and he made a point of working. It was not a strong foundation for a good marriage, but there was a more scandalous issue. The divorce papers exposed a dark aspect to their marriage. According to Patricia's filing when they finally made it official in 1969, the reason for the divorce was adultery. Tony apparently was not always a faithful spouse when he was away from home. Tony moved on fast, and shortly after their divorce, he began living with burgeoning actress Sandra Grant, whom he had met while making the film The Oscar the same year his marriage fell apart. Tony and Sandra tied the knot in 1971 and had 2 children, Joanna and Antonia. However, in 1983, Tony and Sandra decided divorce. In the late 1980s, he got a third chance at love with Susan Crowe, a retired school teacher from New York. This time, Tony made sure to take it very slow, and the pair only married in 2007 when he was in his 80s. Tony and Susan remained married for the rest of his life. Years of struggle. The 1970s were a terrible decade for Tony. Studios wanted crooners like him to cease singing classic songs and instead experiment with more rock-oriented stuff, and the results were catastrophic. Tony despised performing those kinds of songs, the studios hated his efforts, and audiences were indifferent. However, that was not the worst of it. In the mid-70s, he started his own record company, 𝗟𝗶𝗳𝗏. This time, he found out that being a studio executive was a harder job than it appeared. By 1977, his label had folded, and Tony had almost nothing. He had developed a drug addiction, was living beyond his means, and had the Internal Revenue Service trying to seize his Los Angeles home. Turnaround. After a near-fatal cocaine overdose in 1979, Tony made a heartbreaking phone call. He rang up his sons Danny and Day and told them, "Look, I'm lost here. It seems like people don't want to hear the music I make." Danny, in particular, as an aspiring artist himself, wanted to help his father. He came up with a life-saving idea. Danny became Tony's manager, and it was the best decision the Bennetts ever made. Over the next decade, Danny worked hard to get his father's career back on track. He tracked his expenses, set him up in New York instead of the cheesier Vegas venues he had been playing during his decline, and even got him back onto Columbia Records in 1986. Even though Tony was still singing his old standards, these new audiences were rapt. As he put it, "I realized that young people had never heard those songs. Cole Porter, Gershwin, they were like, who wrote that?" To them, it was different. If you're different, you stand out. This only grew as time went on. The 1990s saw a huge boost in Tony's popularity with younger audiences. This was partly due to his appearance on the widespread TV series MTV Unplugged. Accompanied by Elvis Costello and K.D. Lang, Tony bridged the gap in generations who were used to rock music or hip-hop. This led to his MTV Unplugged album going platinum. That was not the only way Tony kept in touch with the younger generation. In 2011, he collaborated with America's Got Talent runner-up Jackie Evancho to make a new duet version of the classic Disney tune When You Wish Upon a Star. Even when he was in his 90s, Tony refused to even consider retiring from showbiz life or the art world. He once compared his situation to those of Jack Benny, Pablo Picasso, and Fred Astaire, stating that those men never retired either. We are nearing the end of our video, but before we proceed, we would like to ask you to please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel at www.youtube.com/c/YouWannaWatch2022 and follow us on our Facebook page at www.facebook.com/YouWannaWatch. Any support you provide us will help us provide you with more and better content. Okay, now back to the story. Awards and accolades. Throughout his lifetime, he sang several duets and organized concerts with many acclaimed American and foreign singers. Tony won 20 Grammy Awards, including the Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award. He also received nominations for several other Grammy Awards that he did not win. Besides the Grammy Awards, Tony also won 2 Emmy Awards for live performances on television. For all Tony's success, there was one achievement that almost eluded him. He incredibly didn't get a #1 album until 2011. Duets II, which came out on his 85th birthday, contained collaborations with the likes of Lady Gaga, Norah Jones, and Willie Nelson. With Duets II, Tony became the oldest living musician to ever debut at #1 on the Billboard 200. The album also features a duet between Bennett and Amy Winehouse singing Body and Soul. The two would share a Grammy Award for Best Pop Duo. Illness and death. Tony's work ethic was old school to the extreme, given that he continued performing well into his 90s. But he was hiding demons behind the stage. Doctors actually diagnosed Tony with Alzheimer's disease all the way back in 2016, and he had to retire from performing in 2021. There were heartbreaking moments along the way. In 2021, when Lady Gaga and Tony released their album Love for Sale, Tony once more cemented his place in the hearts and minds of the younger generation. Yet the reality of the recording studio could be harsh. Reportedly, Tony was sometimes lost and bewildered during his sessions. Yet for all that, he continued fighting. According to Tony's son Danny, although the legendary crooner did have difficulty with his short-term memory, often not realizing he had just performed a concert to a huge crowd, his long-term memory was as perfect as ever, and he would sing his lyrics flawlessly. But the end comes for everyone, even someone as monumental as Tony Bennett. On July 21, 2023, Tony Bennett finally gave his last vow, passing at the age of 96 after suffering from Alzheimer's disease for the better part of a decade. But his final moments were incredible. A crooner to his bones, his family revealed he kept singing to the very end, going out with the song Because of You, his very first hit. He was hailed as the champion and legendary interpreter of the great American songbook. What do you think about the life and legacy of the late Tony Bennett? Are you saddened by his death? Did we miss anything that you think should have been included? Let us know your thoughts by writing a comment on this video. If you're interested in our other videos, just hover over the videos and just press play. Until next time, watchers, thank you for watching our video.